Hello.
So, Wren, one of the reasons that I brought you on is because I know that you have a story of just seriously like coming through Christianity, coming through a lot of obstacles and challenges, and just getting into a place of freedom. And I think you're still evolving in that freedom. And I just felt, you know what? We've known each other for years. We've talked a lot. And I thought she needs to share her story. So I would love for you to start wherever you would like to, just about your journey through Christianity, deconstruction, and what that all looked like.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and thank you for creating this platform so people can share their stories and so people know that leaving Christianity is not an isolated event. There's lots of us exiting, and for good reason. So thank you for creating this platform and letting people know that they aren't alone. So
it's an honor to have you.
All right. Well, okay. So a big part of my journey through Christianity is being adopted. And you mentioned that you're adopted as well.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. We haven't had the chance to talk about that a whole lot, me and you. So, I don't know where you're at in that process, through all of that. But for me, it was a big part of how my life played out. I had a very unusual story with adoption. Okay. And I mean, everyone's story is unique, but there's the typical either adopted at birth or shortly after, or adopted from foster care, being a foster care kid and never getting adopted,
Right.
I was none of that. My adoption story was all about the church. I was like a church baby and like a church community baby. It starts back where my grandmother actually got saved at a Billy Graham crusade.
Oh, wow.
And yeah. And, did the typical Christian stuff. And, however, her husband was abusive, and lots of really dark, bad things happening with him and my mother and her sister. And my grandmother never held him accountable, didn't believe the girls, held up to this Christian wife standard and let the kids get abused, And so my mom, she ended up getting pregnant on her graduation night, and my grandmother kicked her out. And so she went to church. She was picked up by like a bus ministry at the church, and people at the church took her under their wing and tried to mentor her. And my parents had been asked by the pastor to help this woman out. And actually, my birth father was disabled. He had intellectual disabilities. We don't really know his actual diagnosis because they didn't know much about stuff like that back then. So he never had a diagnosis. We're thinking like Asperger's, maybe cerebral palsy. We don't know.
Okay.
But definitely on the spectrum. And it was suggested, I don't know why, but it was suggested that, they marry because they're both struggling. So why not, be stronger together, kind of thing.
Right.
But it doesn't work like that.
True. That's so true.
Does not work like that.
Mhm.
And so it
Mhm.
was kind of, you know, doomed to fail from the start.
Mhm.
But they tried, and they had me and my baby brother. And as things were falling apart like they were destined to do, um they were scrambling. My poor mom didn't have any resources, didn't know what to do. So now not only did she have one kid, but now she has three.
Mhm. Mhm.
know, And she asked my adoptive parents that weren't yet my adoptive parents, but
Huh?
she asked them if they would take us, and they said, well, we can't handle all three of them, but we'll take her. And so I was separated out, and we all just kind of went our own ways. And so it
Oh.
wasn't an adoption that was, my parents weren't looking to adopt. There was no agency involved. It was just it just kind of fell into place.
Mhm.
And so it was very strange and awkward. And I remember so much. Like, I remember having thoughts as an infant in my car seat about family and where I want to be and my level of safety. And like, I had conscious thoughts
Yeah.
contemplating
Right.
what's
Right.
happening around me.
Mhm.
And, my parents couldn't have told me that. It's not
Mhm.
like they instilled memories in me, they didn't even know. Um, so I remember my adoption day. I remember being asked if I wanted to be adopted. I remember all of it. I was only 3 when when I was adopted. I moved in with them when I was 22 months old. So, I was not the typical adoptee case where I didn't know my family, because I did know my family. I was very involved with both sides of my biological birth family. I grew up with 4 different sides of the family. And people would say, like, oh, how lucky you are to have so, extra people who love you. And which that is true. That is true. But nobody could have understood what I was going through as a result of that. You
Right.
know,
Right.
Nobody thinks about it from the kid's perspective, you
Mhm.
know? So that was really hard for me. And my father, being disabled, in a generation where there's no resources, nobody knew, they felt bad for him, but nobody knew how to connect with him. He just clung to God, and he was an extremist. He tried his best, but I have extremists in my blood.
Uh-huh.
Just want to
Right.
say.
Right.
And I was like that too, because I felt isolated,
Sure.
having been removed from my family, and now in a family that was clearly, genetics are huge, like,
Oh.
did not fit in personality wise with
Mhm.
them.
Mhm.
Um, as I was talking to my birth mom and getting to know her over the years, I was like, yeah, I can totally relate to her. Like, I can see the connection and the genetics and all that kind of stuff, but it kind of made it worse. And I didn't understand, judgments and all that was happening. And it was just really, really confusing. And so what I do, I clung to God. God
Right.
was my father.
Right. Yep.
I was
I did
a
the
confused
same.
little
Mhm.
girl,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
It's God's always going to be there. You can talk to him anytime.
Totally.
You
Yep.
your invisible best friend.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just makes sense when you feel lonely.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I was trying to figure out what was going on, because nothing made sense to me in my world.
Mhm.
And I think not just as an adoptee, but I think a lot of people can relate to that, coming from toxic homes, coming from dysfunctional homes. You know, Life is confusing,
Uh-huh.
especially for kids, especially when kids aren't given the respect that they deserve from adults to talk about things. And, kids are just like tossed around, like, what is going on?
Mhm.
So I was confused and I was determined to figure it out. And, my parents were very faithful in church. I think in every church they have like a core group of members who really are the heart of the church and keep it
Yes.
running and
Yes.
keep it going, and you have people who come in and out, but
Yes.
you have like a core group of people who really make up the church. My parents were one of those. They taught Sunday school. We never missed
Yeah.
a service.
Huh?
My dad was head of the missions committee. It was just the church was our life. And I called church my second home. And I was there. I was at church more than I was actually home because I went to Christian school, the church's Christian academy. So,
Oh my goodness. Yes.
100% Christian education. I say the only secular education I had was driver's ed, and it made me feel very, very uncomfortable.
Oh, oh,
I was not prepared for the real world,
right, right. I get it. I get it.
right? It's so
Mhm.
crazy. So, I was very socially awkward.
Mhm.
I mean, how could I not be? And being neurodivergent, we didn't even know what that was at the time. You know
Right.
what I mean? So it was all just really confusing. And being neurodivergent, I took literally everything that they told me and I took it seriously.
Mhm. Mhm.
Like, you tell me that God is love, I'm going to believe God is love. You know, you tell me that there's a literal hell, I'm going to believe there's a literal hell.
Yes.
You
Yes.
know, I'm going to take it seriously. And I don't understand, if there really is a literal hell, how come everyone's just floating along in life like it doesn't even matter,
Good
you
question.
know?
Mhm.
And I was so confused. I'm like, if hell is real,
Right.
how come you guys are acting like normal?
Mhm.
Like,
Mhm.
this is crisis,
Mhm.
you know? And I took that to heart, and I was a very strange child. Like, I was weird, in a social sense, and totally did not fit in. And I was not understood, and I didn't understand anybody else. I didn't get it. And it really bothered me. Like, it really, really bothered me. If hell was real,
Mhm.
how could you didn't act like it?
Mhm.
You know?
Right.
So something was off. I didn't understand the whole going to church thing, singing a song, listening to a sermon, then going out to eat for Sunday dinner. I didn't understand that. Like, what are we doing?
It
Is just
sounds like
going,
you took it very, very seriously to the extreme, like just like I did.
yes,
I mean, I was
yes,
an extremist. It was a way to try to find comfort and try to find acceptance somewhere, but I still felt very isolated and on the outside. So while you were going through this, did you ever ask your parents about it? Was there
oh
anybody that
yeah.
you could ask anybody about with your questions?
I talked to my mom about it a lot, and I think she did the best that she could,
Mhm.
but I think she was just as confused as I was. Like, why are you taking it so seriously? It's not meant to be like that serious.
Wow.
And I'm just like,
People
what do
burning for eternity? I know, like, wait a
you,
minute.
right? I was like,
Right.
something is off here.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just didn't understand. I just couldn't get it. And I just went further and further and further in trying to understand. And
That look like?
the more I alienated myself,
Okay. Yeah.
you know, the more it's so funny too, being adopted, it's either you wall up and nobody can hurt me, or you're such a people pleaser,
Oh,
you
yes.
know?
Or you might
And
have both. You might have both, depending
oh
on the
yeah,
audience,
totally.
because I've done both. Yep.
Yeah. You can totally do both at the same time, even in the same situation.
Absolutely.
Like
Yep.
I will lose myself and I will do everything for you, but I'm not gonna let you in and hurt me.
Mhm.
You know?
Because it's self-preservation.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so it's interesting, even being the people pleaser that I was, I didn't want to disappoint my family,
Mhm.
but here I was with the message about hell and Jesus saving, all this kind of stuff. It's almost like I had to choose. Like,
Yes.
I'm like, well, I'm not gonna sacrifice myself to hell if hell is real, So I didn't want to disappoint my parents. And
Mhm.
it's funny, even being like an extremist believer, I wanted to make my parents proud that I wasn't like, not believing, but I didn't
Right.
want to make them ashamed because I was an extremist either. It's kind of weird that way.
Yes.
But I just didn't know how to wrap my head around the gospel message without being an extremist, So even though it was like I had to disappoint my parents, even by being an extremist, it's like so wild. It's like totally fucks you up inside. But I
So,
definitely went.
so when
What?
you're probably headed this way, I can feel like you're headed in that direction. But when you say you were an extremist, that looks different for everybody. For some people, it's isolating yourself for hours and reading the Bible and then taking that Bible and going out and sharing with everybody and his brother and, being like anytime in a situation, you could be just all spiritual and never really even be real or normal or down to earth. You're always in the clouds, and it can be this big message of separation. You just keep dividing people and you're not trusting people and they're going to hell over here and and it's like, what did your extremism look like? How did that play out?
Yes to all of the above. Like I could relate more to a monk than I could the normal person.
Oh my gosh, me too. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And
I was
Jesus
going to
was
be a nun.
real.
Like I went through a phase where I was like, I need to be a nun. I think I'm supposed to do this. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. It's wild. And because I always had that, like, that something isn't right feeling, and I was trying to figure out what it was, I was always kind of pressing buttons on purpose to try to help aid me in my understanding,
Mhm.
like, because I was so confused. So I kind of like, if the preacher said, we need to do this, you need to burn all your secular music, then I
Yeah.
went home and I was like, Mom, Dad, you need to burn all your secular music. You know
Right.
what I mean?
Yeah. I did the
And
same.
it's crazy. And
Mhm.
so like whatever, I think the church had far more influence on me than my parents did.
Yes. I feel the same.
And they would talk to me about it. I remember because my parents were part of that church for decades, and they, saw administrations come and go. And my parents would say, every time that we get a new leadership, we get a whole new set of rules, and
Mhm.
your life would completely change based on who was in charge.
Mhm.
And I saw through that at like, that doesn't make sense. And why would you put up with that? But I didn't know what to do with it.
Well, what are you going to do? Right.
Right. It's
Yep.
like, I just have to keep going. And so it's just so strange, like such a dissociation,
Mhm.
but desperately trying to figure it out at the same time.
Mhm. And
So
I want to commend you with that too, because that's the one thing I've admired about you for years now of knowing you is your desire to know truth. And I think you were gifted very at a young age, very similar to me and countless other people, that inner knowing of like, this just is off. I don't know how, I can't verbalize it. I don't even really know who to talk to about it because I'm getting really wild over here in it. But you you had that ability, honestly, from a young age to be able to say something just isn't right. I'm seeing between something. I don't know what I'm seeing, but I'm seeing it. And honestly, I think that has been a saving grace for you, even though it led you into areas of extremism and led you into, real religious bondage and suppression and all sorts of different ways. It also was your saving grace. It was like the little angel on the shoulder going, Wren, hey, look at this, Wren, and you couldn't avoid that. Like you couldn't avoid your intuition on the inside at all. And I think that's a real saving grace. I think a lot of times in Christianity, especially being raised evangelical and fundamental, and got into a whole lot, Lutheran first, but then I got all swung into the charismatic. You don't question, like you just kind of go with the flow, and it does create that disassociation you speak about. It's like I'm in over here on this side. Yeah, I'm niggling in the back here. It doesn't feel right for me, but I'm I'm not going to look at that yet. I'm going to look at that at another time. So I think that's a saving grace. I just want to say I admire that about you. Always have.
Well, thank you. Yes, absolutely. It like gnawed on me. I used to say, it felt like this is totally a neurodivergent thing to say, but it felt like there's like a little librarian in my head, like searching through the library, all the books, and like searching, and it like wouldn't stop. And it was so bothering me. I was like, I cannot rest until she finds whatever she needs to find, whatever she's looking for, because it's driving me crazy.
Totally.
And it was wild. And I think that was my big drive, that something feels off, and there's like a huge fly in here that just flew in, and it's really creepy. Sorry.
That's okay. Well, this is what life is all about. I like it.
Oh my gosh, it looks like a death fly or something.
Oh my god.
It's like that big.
I could get really spiritual with it, but I won't. I won't.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so hopefully it stays over there.
Yeah.
And it finds its way out. Okay. So that's kind of what was my drive. I was like, I don't understand it, but I was determined to figure it out.
Okay.
And I really am glad and grateful that I went in it, because I feel like it gave me more experience and more, firsthand experience of how dangerous it is. I know it inside out and frontwards and backwards, because I was in it, and I was in it for years, and I wanted understanding, and I think I got it. As far as understanding the Christian culture.
So talk about that. Talk about Christian culture. What did that look like for you? Because I don't know were you in a denominational church?
Yes. So I was in Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Oh, yes.
And those two first words are very, very important to them. They're not just Baptist, they're Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Exactly. I'm hearing you. I got it. I got it.
Lots of classes on why we're Independent Fundamental Baptist.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Yes. My pastor actually started a seminary that was pretty big in New England, and he started when I was like in junior high school or whatever. And so he was definitely a seminarian teacher. So he was more teacher than he was preacher. And so he brought a lot of that elements into it, into the Hebrew and Greek and, all that kind of stuff. And the seminarians intermingled with us at the school, and, I got a really good education that way.
Yeah.
Loosely education. And it flew out.
It's all good.
So Yeah, I I was very comfortable with preacher boys.
Okay.
You know, I looked up to them. My dad was the head of the missions committee, so I really idolized people in ministry.
Oh,
You know
yes.
what I mean?
Mhm.
And
Yep.
I also learned, like my church, we treated the missionaries that came wonderfully. Like we totally celebrated them. We did lots of cool things for their kids. You know, like we made it big. If you're going to be a missionary, like we're going to celebrate you. And honestly, do you know what that taught me? What I took away from that is that everybody deserves to be celebrated. You know, that when I meet you, I'm looking up to you. Like you are it. You know, because you're unique,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
you know there's nobody else on the earth like you.
Sure.
And so coming and approaching people with that reverence, and like it's an honor for me to be with you in this moment, you know. And I don't really understand how I equated that from the missions conference, but I did. And I'm grateful for it because I think
Yes.
it's definitely helped give me a good perspective on people instead of judging them, you
Mhm.
know, right
Mhm.
from the get-go. And so I really appreciate that aspect. But yeah, fear of not just hell, but also the end times,
Oh, yes.
right?
That was a big one for us too. Mhm.
Whoa,
Oh,
like
yes.
terror.
Yes.
And
Nightmare.
the fact, oh
Mhm.
my gosh, and the fact that it could happen
Mhm.
at literally any second. So you're just driving and you're in the car and you're like, it could happen right now.
Mhm.
And then what would happen? We'd get into a car crash.
Mhm.
No, it's just like it's when something bad is, you're told that something bad is going to happen looming over you, and
Mhm.
it could at any single second. What? Why are they telling kids this? It's
Right,
crazy.
right. And not only that, but when you are equating God with that, or equating, other worldly experiences with all of that, I mean, it brings a lot of fear. I had some friends,
Yeah.
Greek Orthodox, and what they believed was if you were caught sinning at the time of Jesus's return, then you were going to hell. And I remember talking to this girl, like we spent hours talking about this. And I said to her, I said, so what does that do for you mentally? What does that look like for you emotionally? And she's like, well, I can't, her husband was like a priest, and he really, she couldn't say a whole lot to me, to be honest. But what the sense was, what I gathered from it was that she was tormented all the time because she was constantly making sure that she wasn't sinning. But then she would say, but she didn't know about the hidden sins. Like, what about these hidden sins she was doing? And I just thought, my God, this is tormenting. This is tormenting.
Yes.
It's not
Yes.
striking, it's not creating anything but in like fear and panic and anxiety in people, and especially in young children, especially in people. I remember I had to toe the line. It was very much like, be careful, Ellen, you could drop off the ditch on you, this big ravine at any moment. You could like fall off if you're not doing things right. And because, like you, I'm one who wanted to know, and I really loved God. I wanted to really serve God. It was like, I'm jumping in with this thing, but it tormented. It was tormenting.
Yes. Tormenting. Absolutely. I don't think we believed that if God came back and you were sinning, you're going to hell, but it was more of but it was definitely preached down our throat that you want him to find you in an honorable place, that you're not disappointing him when he comes back.
Right.
So there's, you know,
And how do you achieve that, Wren? Like, let's get honest. How does any
it's
human
so
achieve
impossible.
that?
It's so abstract. Everything that they
Right.
talk about, you can't place any of it. There's no way to know if any of it was real, like even just the sinner's prayer. How many times have we all said the sinner's prayer in case the last one didn't count for some reason that you didn't know about?
Oh, yes. Or going to the altar numerous times to repent over the same thing every time. And every like, Sunday you're up at the altar.
There's no security.
Right.
There's nothing that you can grasp to hold on to let you know you're okay. There was none of that. And it was really weird too, the whole, like, I think this is a huge divide among the denominations about, as far as salvation goes and who's actually saved and who's not, and how long you can retain your salvation for, and right. What are the requirements for salvation? All of that was just, nobody agreed on anything because they all made it up. Okay. So, but my denomination believed once saved, always saved. So, during altar call, if you mean it, if you really mean it, and you pray this prayer tonight,
mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter if you reject God later in life, you're still saved.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they actually believed that, they wouldn't give a shit when people walked away. But they do. They do. They're like, not only did they see me walking away that I was going to hell, even though I was like one of the truest believers among them,
Right, I hear you.
I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But I truly believed it. And then when I walked away, now I'm going to hell. But not just that, but my children are going to hell because I am. Like, nothing made sense.
Yeah.
Because they're just making it up as they go along. Why? Because it's all about control and a feeling of superiority.
So talk about that. This is your thing. I know this is your topic right here.
Yeah. The control and oppression and power dynamics, well, it's a cool little club that they get to go to, and everybody talks the same. They practice, like, what do you say if this situation comes up? Like we would break out into our youth group. Our youth group would break up into little smaller groups, and they'd give us scenarios. Like, what happens if, what are you supposed to say?
Yes.
If you're presented with this situation, what are you supposed to say when someone says this to you? It's like, we're all robots.
That's right.
Thought.
Right.
They just tell you what the answers are.
Yes.
There's no heart in that. There's no seeking God. There's no personal relationship when your thoughts are made for you.
Yes.
And they would say, this isn't a religion. This is a relationship. But you start talking about a real relationship with Jesus, and now you're ostracized because you're New Age.
Right. Right.
You can't win. You cannot win with them because what it is, it's a lifestyle that comes pre-programmed. And when you say yes to them, you are transformed. But really, what you have done is you have said no to your own identity. And now you take on the identity of Christ, which it's not Christ. It is it's being conformed to their interpretation and their rules. Whoever the leadership is at the time, and it's like, it is a cult. It is a cult. There's no true identity there. They hate human rights. They hate, your own, having your own identity and your own expression, because everyone has to be cookie cutter and looking the same, you know.
Now they would argue that. I mean, I'm with you 100%. I'm with you 100%. But I think that they would argue that, and this is going to be the most ridiculous example you've ever heard in your life. But I went to this church, and I remember when a worship leader wore jeans. They wore jeans onto the stage. Now, I was a worship leader myself, so like I remember that. And they wore jeans, and oh my God. Yep. Now, up to that point, polyester pants were fine. The khakis were going on. That was all good. But the jeans was sacrilegious. And I remember thinking, even at that point, I remember thinking, I don't understand. You're anointed last Sunday, and now this Sunday, you're like not anointed anymore because of your Levi's, So I understand where you're going with this, that there isn't a lot of wiggle room to freely think. I saw recently somebody said that, God would never lead all these deconstructors to leave their faith or to do anything like that. And I thought, you're missing the point of deconstruction. The point of deconstruction is a falling into something else. It's falling into the real you, falling into who you are. And they were like, no, God would never do that. And then they would couch it with a phrase. And I just wanted to say, well, what about where it says God's ways are higher than ours? But see, they'll have an answer for that, just like you said, because
they answer for all of it.
Yeah, it has to be an absolute way. There's only one way to believe.
Mm-hmm. And that varies from church to church.
And from leader to leader, and from person to person.
Yes, it's so crazy. It's such a mind fuck, because none of it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, no, like our church literally would preach against human rights.
What do you mean?
Like, they would say, you have no rights. They literally come out and say, you have no rights.
Yes.
Because that is prideful and arrogant.
I heard
and
it.
You are to die to yourself and live for God. So the world says you deserve this, but God says, no, follow me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, I mean,
what did that look like for you? Did you cut parts of yourself off? Is that what it looked like? Or?
Oh, yeah. I mean, always trying to see how I can sacrifice and say no to myself and have self-control, and always trying to take the high road and all that kind of stuff, because you're not supposed to be of this world, and this world would say follow your heart, but that's wrong, because the heart is evil and deceitful and wicked, and you can't trust it. So yeah.
Yes, that's my verse. Oh gosh.
Oh man. So I mean, how do they mind control you? It is stuff like that they strip you away of your identity and your self-worth and your freedom, all in the name of living for God. And it's a nightmare, because everything is, it's not me, it's Jesus. It's not me, it's Jesus. It's all about Jesus. And where are you? Well, I'm not here anymore. It's Jesus. Like, they purposefully refuse their own agency.
Mm-hmm.
They refuse their agency. Like, they don't even want to acknowledge that they have it, because it's all Jesus. Don't look at me. It's all Jesus.
Right. Don't thank me, Jesus. Yep.
Yeah. Constantly, everything that they do is all about give glory to God, bad things happens, well, let's glorify God through it. Something good happens, glorify God.
Mhm.
Nothing ever on the spotlight of them. And how convenient is that when there is some kind of, big sin going on, that they don't take accountability for that either, because they're covered by Jesus.
Oh, yes. Yes. His blood. Mhm.
Yeah.
Covered
So
by blood. Yeah.
if you mention hypocrisy of Christians, we're all sinners. We're all sinners, and that's why we need Jesus. So you can't hold it against us, because we're all sinners. We all need Jesus. And they just brush it under the rug because, well, we're just sinners, and not ever doing the appropriate steps to make it right, And it's very convenient for them to play the role that they're supposed to, so they can enjoy fellowship with one another, have a good time in the way that they think they're having a good time,
Mhm.
and walk out like it never even happened to begin with. It's
Okay,
just
so can I ask you a question because of your denomination? And maybe if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. But in the scenarios that you're giving me, I saw the differences between how men were treated and how women were treated. You could commit the exact same sin, okay? But there would be a different feeling for how the men were treated versus the woman. Did you see that? Did you experience that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I definitely did not notice it at the time.
Right. I didn't either. Me either.
Like that whoop, went right over my head.
Yep.
Because I'm just focused on, I'm holding myself accountable. You know what I mean? Like, I am in it, and I'm in like a little tunnel vision. And so I didn't see that part.
No. Yeah.
But I saw in my home how that went down. I knew the woman was always blamed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes.
And the man can just jerk his head around and she'll follow him, no matter what. And he can say whatever he wanted and get away with it. And she's at his beck and command, whatever he says, she just follows around,
Mm-hmm.
and it's really, really sad. And that's what I wanted. Like, I wanted that. I wanted to be the submissive doormat wife.
Right.
I don't know. They get you to glorify it and wanting it. And it's interesting because I have a lot of strong women in my family.
Okay.
And we definitely did not let my dad get away with everything. We would put him in his place. I would yell at my dad too. Like, I would call him out on stuff. I was that kid. It was like, it's funny, like you're both. It's
Oh,
like
yeah.
you are people pleaser, but then you're also like, screw you.
Right. Yes, I get it.
you know? And I held my parents accountable to what we were all being taught,
Oh,
and yeah. So I'm like, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to talk to me that way.
wow. Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah. So that was kind of fun. But even still, no matter what, even if, you know, my dad's tone was too harsh and we didn't like it, whatever,
Mhm.
he still ruled. He was still king.
Right.
No
He
matter.
was the priest of the home, as the terminology was that I was taught.
Yeah, exactly. So patriarchy lives on, and it doesn't matter if you stand up for yourself, patriarchy still lives on, you know? And so that's interesting. But I wanted that.
Mhm.
So so funny. I remember I went to 2 different Bible colleges, and my first one that I went to was like strictly for ministry
Okay.
type of college.
Yep.
Okay. I only stayed there 1 year, but I remember asking the pastor's wife, this is how clueless I was about the real world or anything. Okay. I asked the pastor's wife, who, you know, they were like pretty much celebrities in the church, you know. But I asked her, I'm like, how come there isn't a degree for a pastor's wife? Like, why don't you have that role for a pastor's
Oh my.
pastor, right?
Oh my
So,
God.
and she looked at me, she was like, honey, we don't do that. We just learn from watching other women, and you know, they had classes on how to be a pastor's wife. Yeah, in Sunday school they did. So I'm like, why not just make a whole degree about it? Yeah.
Classes on how to be a pastor's wife. What did that look like?
Being submissive, you know, like, I mean, talk about what that looked like to me, and what, like, we were told in college, because all the women there in that particular Bible college were there basically to marry.
Oh, bridal college. That's
Ministry.
what we called it. Bible college, bridal college. Yeah.
Yeah, do you know
Yes.
what I mean? So
Yep.
it just makes me, being neurodivergent, I was just like, well, that's what you're here for anyway. So
Mhm.
just come out and say it.
Mhm.
You
Oh,
know, like, right? Yeah,
right. That's logical to me. Okay.
right. Okay. So, but yeah, they would actually have classes on how to be a pastor's wife. Make sure you get all your husband and kids clothes out the night before and iron them, have all their outfits ready. Like, we were taught this in Bible college.
Wow.
Like, the epitome of what it means to be a good woman is the checklist, you know? You're doing the top things of everything, all the burdens that women carry. It was idolized there. Like, you are not allowed to step out of line. They held all of that up to you. Take care of yourself, your husband, and the household. You take care of everything, and you do it well, and you take the high road, and you,
Smile.
yeah, and you smile through it all. And
Yeah.
so I was like, why not just make a degree out of it?
That seems logical to me. Okay. Wow.
Yeah, it's so funny. So I only stayed there 1 year,
Yeah.
and yeah, but I did still end up graduating with a Bible degree,
Mhm.
um, at a different college. But yeah, so I wanted that. I wanted to
No.
marry a preacher, and thank God I didn't. I know tons of women did and ended up deconstructing, and that's even worse, you know, for their situation.
Mhm.
Did not, and younger me would have been very disappointed.
Mhm. Yes. Yes.
um, but yeah, so when I became a mom, I was terrified even more of the end times,
Yes.
and what
Yes.
happens if my children aren't don't accept Jesus as their savior yet, and the rapture happens, and now they're left alone.
Mhm.
And I was terrified. And my first Bible study was in the book of Revelation, because I was like, I got to figure this out, because I'm scared to leave my kids,
Right.
you know. And it's not that in my particular denomination, which again, this varies from denomination to denomination as far as like the age of accountability, and
Mhm.
are children saved, are babies saved, you know, all that kind of stuff. Like, my particular denomination believed that, like, the little ones were okay up until they started expressing some kind of understanding, or they started having meltdowns as toddlers, which I think that was like part of the sin. Like when toddlers start having meltdowns, that's when like they start getting their sin nature, activating their sin nature.
Right. So they went from goodness to sin nature.
Yeah.
Right then, 2.5.
Yeah. So I remember seeing that in my kids too. I'm like, oh, here we go. They've, it's been activated.
Gosh, that creates such anxiety. You would, wow. Wren,
Yeah,
I am so sorry. That is full on anxiety.
Right?
How
It's
could you
crazy.
enjoy your child if you're constantly fearful that they're going down the wrong path?
And they can't. And if you really believe in hell, which I did, there is no enjoyment in life at all. It strips you of enjoying life completely while forcing you to enjoy it. Because when I saw people, yes, I saw their uniqueness and I saw their, their wonder and beauty and their sacredness, but I also saw them as going to hell. You're going to hell if you don't have Jesus. And it's like, I love you so much and I want to honor you, but it's like constantly the analogy of someone like getting hit by a car or like being in a burning building. You don't care about their feelings when you're trying to save their life.
Right.
So you can offend everybody as you need to, whatever you have to do to save them, because their feelings don't matter if you're saving their life.
But what happens is you take the humanness out of it. You strip the humanness. I think what I have found stepping away from Christianity and out of the church now for a while is my humanity's coming back.
Yes. And because, the very gospel alone, thanks to Eve, right? It's never Adam. It's actually Eve, right? That we blame all of the sin on is Eve. Now being born human is evil. Thanks, Eve. So yeah, being human is bad. Your natural state of who you are is evil and bad, and it'll land you in hell. And it does strip the beauty of what it means to be human and part of this interconnected world,
Right.
And it's really sad because I think if we're honest with ourselves, we don't actually believe that.
Come on.
So it's when you really do love people, you really care about them, and you see them as in a crisis, right? Like going to hell, like being set on fire is probably the top crisis that you can get.
Right.
So you see them like you love them and want to help them because they're in crisis and they don't even know that they're in crisis.
Right.
So you got to do whatever you have to do to get through to them to save them from themselves.
Yes.
And that is an extremist with no boundaries.
Yes, I hear you.
And they don't teach you boundaries. They teach you to cross boundaries.
But all in the name of God. All in the name of God. It's okay. It's okay to cross boundaries. I don't know if you've experienced this, but it feels like people will say, well, I'm just telling you the truth. And I used to be the same way. I was like, it didn't matter my delivery. My delivery didn't matter. It just really didn't, because it was like all about saving you. So I could be an asshole. Treat you completely, disregard your feelings, disregard the fact that you're crying in this moment, disregard something. It doesn't matter, because the whole goal here, my agenda for meeting with you is I want to save you. And to be completely honest, I look back on some of that now and I think, man, and I'm okay. I don't sit here and like beat myself up over it, and I was a missionary. So, I did that. Was I a good missionary? Yes. Did I learn to love on the field? Yeah, I did. But Could I have done things very differently? Absolutely. And what I love, I think about the deconstructing community and is all of this is we are going back and we're saying, hey, things weren't right and we got to do it better. But see, a lot of Christians don't want to look at that. They're not wanting to look that they hurt someone. They don't want to look like that they favored someone here and kicked someone out over here. They don't dive deep enough because somewhere it was God's will and they can justify it. They can justify it somewhere, you know? And I remember somebody, this is a thing, and then I'm going to ask you to talk a little bit about your deconstruction. Because I know we could talk for hours on stuff like this, but I knew of people who did a lot of counseling with this one woman and she ended up committing suicide. Okay. That wrecked a lot of us. And they were Christians who did a lot of counseling with her. And I remember thinking, how are you going to help the congregation? How are you going to help people reconcile the fact that this woman sat in the counseling office and then eventually committed suicide? Now we know that people make choices and we know that, you know, if somebody wants to do something, you can't stop them, yada, yada. But that's not where I'm going with this. Where I'm going with was there was a disregard. Like it was like they blacked out. It was almost like this blindness came over them and they're like, well, you know, she made her choice and, you know, but God's a merciful God. And, you know, and I'm thinking, do you grieve over this? Like, are you going to grieve over this fact? And when I started seeing such disconnect in the church, that's where I began to really shift, was when I heard you couldn't have emotions, you couldn't feel, you can't get angry, you can't have any sexual feelings, for goodness sakes, you can't do anything, you can't. And I'm thinking, I'm not perfect, I'm human. Like, what am I supposed to do here? I'm human, you know? And so it's like stuff like that, mental illness and all sorts of different areas. I feel like the church has just, they're not meeting the needs of the people.
No, they're
because
not.
of the rote methodology behind what they do.
It's so true, because they strip them of their humanness and their identity, you know, and agency, and they spiritualize everything. Everything is spiritualized. And so, yeah, like you see that in any death at all, that, like I had a college roommate who passed away. She was a young mom, 2 little toddler boys. Her husband was in the ministry and she passed away, you know, suddenly. It was, you know, not expected. And I'll never forget his post that he made, glorifying God, and this was God's will, and you know, it was all positive feelings. And I'm just like, be real, like have your own thoughts for once.
Right. Thank you.
You know, like it's okay to be sad and angry and grieve. You just lost your wife.
Right.
You know, your kids just lost their mom. Like, be upset. You don't have to gloss it over and give glory to God when this is like the worst thing that could have happened to your family. You know, and there's no room for that whatsoever. You know, I remember another core member of our church passed away, and hi, Minnie. But I remember a core member passed away, and she was older and had her grandkids and teenagers or whatever, and like a month had passed and everyone was so up in arms because her teenage grandson was starting to lose faith, and because he was so angry and grieved and he was struggling with the loss of his grandma, and you know, everyone was all like uptight about it because he's having feelings about his grandmother. And I'm just like, what's wrong with you? You know,
we need to be able to question. We were taught not to question.
Right.
And I think that there's so many people walking around bypassing their you know, spiritual bypassing, in denial, disassociating, because you don't question God. That's what you don't do. This, God had a reason for taking so-and-so. Well, wait a minute,
Right.
that is not a way. Can we just stop? Like you're saying, can we think? Can we come out of the hypnosis and
Right.
think
Yeah.
for a minute? And,
Yeah.
I would love to see more people wrestle, to be honest, because
Mhm.
when I see people not wrestling, then I question that. I question
For
that.
real.
And it's not
For real.
because of anything other than the fact that I used to be there, not questioning, and now I'm wrestling with things. I'm looking at things. My eyes are open to things, which I think is the joy of deconstruction. You begin to open your eyes, you begin to see things. It's scary as hell, but you do. So can you take just a few minutes here? I know this is like, and just share a
Yeah,
little bit
sorry,
about
it's so long.
deconstruction, because you've really been deconstructing. Like, what caused you to get out?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. Like my kids started me down that path, you
Okay.
know. But like I said, I went deeper in it before I got out. So I like went where I hit a wall where I couldn't relate to anybody. I had social anxiety. Like I couldn't stand looking at another person because I was so scared for them to go to hell. And I felt responsible for having broad shoulders with them. Like I just hit a point where I couldn't deal with people anymore because it was so consuming. And I thought, well, that's not right either. That doesn't sound healthy
Right,
either.
right.
So I didn't know what to do about it though. So I just kind of like held it there and was just like, okay, I'm just gonna wait and know something will help me. And my birth father, he passed away when I was pregnant with my 5th child.
Wow.
And that was a big moment for me. I was never close to him because of his disabilities. I wasn't able to connect very well with him, but I knew he loved me, and he was a devout Christian. And the night before I was going to the hospital to give birth, he came and visited me in my dream. And that totally blew me away because I didn't even believe in that stuff, you
Right.
know? So that just blew a hole through everything I ever knew. And I
Wow.
was like, how are you here? Like, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. And he was like, I have something to tell you. It's really important. I want you to listen to me. And I was like, just in utter shock that I like couldn't grasp this thing, but I knew it was important. And then a couple months later, through resonance effect, sometimes it doesn't catch up until later. I ended up having this vision of kind of the end of the world in a little kind of thing, that kind of removing all the hypnosis and all the fighting and all the division, and everyone's just like, man, I love you, I would never fight with you, I
Wow.
love you, I wouldn't do that, like it felt like we were kind of like under a spell or something. And that's when I knew that there was no hell. Like, there's no hell, hell's not real. And I'm so naive. Oh my gosh. I thought that this was the best news ever and everyone's gonna love it.
Oh no.
Like,
Oh no. What are you thinking, Ren?
like, man, all their dreams and all their prayers will be answered. All their love
Oh God.
so scared that they're in hell. Like, they're not. It's okay. Guys, everything's okay. You don't have to worry anymore. There's no hell. This is good,
Oh my.
really good news. And I laughed for a week straight. I was like, God played a joke on us.
Oh my God. Did you say that to people? Oh, that would have never gone over. No,
No, oh, I made everyone furious. They thought I literally lost my mind.
of course.
You know, like I did a complete 180 overnight and nobody like they're like, what happened to you?
Uh-huh.
You know, like my ex tried to put me in the psych ward and yeah, it was like insane. But
My
I
God.
was having the great time of my life. Like I remember telling my kids, I'm like, guys, hell's not real. They're like, really? You don't believe hell's real anymore? I was like, no, hell's not real. They're like, yes. And they still remember that day. They're like, that was the best day.
Right.
So it worked for my kid, didn't work for everyone else.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah, that was funny. But yeah, I freaked a lot of people out. But when I was already delusional under a spell, you know, like
Right.
I couldn't relate to anybody and I was so depressed because I really believed it. And then to go from that, like that was really the cause of a lot of my anxiety and my depression,
Mhm.
fear. That's what was holding me back. So when to have that to let go of all of that,
Oh my gosh.
so much freedom. I was like, I am free.
Right. Right.
Like this
Yeah.
is the best thing ever. Like
Mhm.
Rapunzel, you know?
Right.
And I was just so innocently happy
Right. I
that
get.
it totally freaked everyone out. And I still laugh about it. It was so funny.
Oh my gosh. So then did
Yeah.
that cause you to, because eventually you've left the church too, right? Like that's just caused, did that all just balloon? And then you,
Well, I actually at that time had already stopped going to church
okay.
because of all the hypocrisy. And I'm like, you guys aren't following the real Jesus. I don't know what you're doing over there, but it's not real. So I had already left, like, I had already stopped going to church at that point, but
Mhm.
I was definitely still a follower of Jesus.
Okay. Okay.
Then I just switched to believing in universalism and that God saves everybody.
Mhm.
You know, I was still very much a follower of Jesus for a while after that, but I did have people who curse me that say like you're gonna walk away from him completely, and I took that on as like a doom and gloom kind of thing, you know, like they were actually trying to curse me. But now I'm like, thanks, man.
I understand.
I don't
I
really care.
understand.
So, but yeah, after that, then my marriage kind of blew up, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
And I had 5 kids,
Mhm.
and we're all a heavily undiagnosed neurodivergent family. And I physically, because my body went through hell trying to birth these babies and, you know, keep everyone alive. I had so much trauma. I have chronic illness.
Mhm.
And I went through burnout at the same time, my deconstruction, my marriage falling apart. We had moved, the death of my father, all this thing just blew up in my face. It was a very bad time. And I was happy because I was free, but I went through burnout. It was like my body just collapsed.
Yeah.
And then I couldn't be the wife that I was supposed to be anymore. And
Right.
he had to step up and he had to take care of the kids because I physically could not do it. And then that just was, all of it was too much for him and he lashed out.
Mhm.
And lots of bad things happen in Sparrow, but yeah, and then ended up neither one of us could take the kids on full time because there was like he couldn't handle a 5 and I physically couldn't do it anymore. And so we had to split up the kids 2 and 3. And that has been very, very hard, especially as an adoptee, going through that.
Mhm.
And it's
Mhm.
the last thing that I ever wanted. And life happens, trauma happens, and unfortunately, that's how it is. Thankfully, the kids are happy and they do better in the small groups. So we're all good there. But it's a big trauma. And so deconstruction totally affected me and my family negatively in that way. And it just added more trauma. Marriages are up for a real trial, right? When one partner deconstructs.
Mhm.
Because made this union based on a certain set of standards, certain set of beliefs. And then when one partner walks away, how is that union going to hold up? For me, it didn't, and
Right.
then I experienced DV, and that ripple effect.
Mhm.
And then that's when I learned, when I entered a DV case, that is when I really learned about the oppression of women in the church. Like my eyes weren't open until I experienced it myself,
Yes.
and not in the church, but in society, how they handle victims who are traumatized. When you are traumatized, you have a different type of behaviors than if you aren't traumatized.
Right.
And the system does not acknowledge that.
Mhm.
However, if you show the behaviors of a trauma victim, they think you're the abuser.
Mhm.
It's like so dumb. But yeah, we definitely need more trauma informed people in the system. Professionals need to be trauma informed and what to look for.
Yes.
But that's also when I learned about the social aspect, how it affects politically, because being a fiscal conservative, um you know saying no to big government, and you don't want government to take care of you, and they shouldn't step in and help. That should be the job of the church. Oh yeah, well, when you don't have a church to help you,
Right.
you go. Like,
Mhm.
no, it is the job of the government to take good care of its citizens, so that was all really hard for me to handle, walking into it as a political conservative, because
Mhm.
my eyes were just open and I didn't have a choice. And then I just saw everything and I was like,
Right.
this is off too.
Right. Right.
You
And see, you're saying something very interesting, and I know I'm going to need to wrap this up here, but um, you're showing the progression of you're not in the world, you're not in the world, you're not in the world when in the church, right? You're not in the world, you're not, well, it is, you're not of the world, so you don't see
Mhm.
anything. You're wrapped up in that whole climate, that whole culture, you're doing that whole thing. Then as you start to break out, as you start to begin to see things within the church, well, then it just balloons into society too. Like
Yeah.
there's no way to avoid anymore some of the cataclysmic shit that is going down in our nation with regards to evangelical fundamentalism and like with Christianity. It is you. I know there are so many people who just don't see it and they think this is just such a good path we're on. But then I know a whole lot of other people, and even myself who's broken away. I'm like, this is not a good path. This is control. This is manipulation. This is the handmaid's tale coming. This is like, there's a whole lot of stuff there. And I guess what I want to say to you, and then I want you to just kind of like close out, encourage people who are deconstructing, is that once you begin to see, you can't go backwards. And that's the thing.
Yeah.
I've had people say to me, "Oh, Ellen, you're just going through a phase." I'm like, "You have no idea. I didn't go through a
Mhm.
phase. I've gone through a complete 380, 360 life change. It's a total life
Mhm.
change. It's a total perspective shift. It is complete. I cannot go back.
Yeah, definitely not. You cannot unsee it.
No, you can't once you see. So
Yeah.
I just want you to just encourage people. I'll give you like 2 minutes here, Wren. I know that we're kind of ending here, but just what can you say to encourage people who are starting on this journey? Because it's happening everywhere. Never say
Yeah,
never.
exactly. It can absolutely crush your soul at the same time of reclaiming your life, and you can, like, it's such a huge extreme set of emotions at the same time, right? It's like crushing your soul, but it's
Totally.
also giving.
Yes.
And you just gotta cling on to that part and let what's supposed to fall away
Mhm.
because you have to restore your own agency first.
Mhm.
And um we have to be strong in that process of knowing our rights, knowing our constitutional rights, what it means to just be human. We have to be really strong in that area, because the peer pressure and the disappointment,
Oh yeah.
all of that will come for you,
Mhm.
and it'll be there at every turn, especially as they enter into the politics, and you can't escape it. And to really keep your head on straight, you have to take root in your own agency
Yes.
and your own rights, because you have to be able to hold yourself when they're trying to strip you away from it. And I mean, our country is heavily influenced by Christianity and religion,
It is.
going to the founding, and that's a whole other topic. But it's important to know how the religious culture has influenced regular American culture.
Mhm.
And I used to say that years ago when I was processing all of it, but now I see it. Now that I'm speaking about it, I'm hearing stories.
Mhm.
People would say, my family wasn't religious, but we were heavily influenced by, and I still have to go through the same process
Mhm.
to shed
Yes.
all of that stuff too. It's not just the extremists that need to be
Exactly.
conditioned.
Mhm.
Everyone's so heavily influenced by this. It is part patriarchy, it's part of our culture, not just in America, but across the globe.
Mhm.
All of humanity is patriarchy. And, patriarchy hurts everybody. It
Mhm.
is a respect to men in some way, in like a flip side,
Mhm.
we all have to decondition ourselves. It is all of our responsibility to do that. Why? To respect ourselves and to respect our neighbor.
Mhm.
To create a society that we don't have to heal from. That's my goal,
Mhm.
and right now, just living in our society, we are conditioned.
Mhm.
It's not all men, not all Christians, whatever. That's dumb. You may not be you may not be an asshole on purpose. You might not, but we're all conditioned that way. And it's passive.
Mhm.
And we have to be active and intentional about deconstructing these ideas that have influenced us,
Yes.
that we aren't being the asshole that we don't want to be.
Right. Right. I hear you. Thank you. Thanks, Wren.
Well,
Wren,
thank you so much for having me on.
Wren, I like you. You're
I
awesome.
like you, Ellen.
Really, really, honestly. And thank you for just sharing from your heart and sharing candidly and openly as well. I really appreciate that. I know that there's a lot to the story. I know that we touched like this tiny little bit, and but I just encourage people to go to your page and to read the stuff that you put up, because you're a profound writer. Comes out,
Okay.
yeah, comes out amazing. And I just encourage people to go there. So thanks,
Well,
friend.
thank you. Yes. All right. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.